So a very warm welcome to all of you here present in our nominal Normative Orders book launch series. It's a great pleasure and honor to present a book that just came out. It's available in open access and will soon also be available in print. It was generated not just during, but with the topic of the COVID-19 pandemic, and it addresses an issue or a host of issues related to the emerging new landscape of global media that we have witnessed or am witnessing or will witness in the course of this pandemic. As we all know, this pandemic meant a lot of things to a lot of people, including lots of tragedies, loss of life of a great many people, and other losses of jobs and education and so on. But what it also meant was that our lives went online at a scale which we did not know before. This pandemic is not just or mainly, maybe you disagree, a media phenomenon, but it is also a media phenomenon. And this book deals with the developments we are witnessing. It's called Pandemic Media, Preliminary Notes Toward an Inventory. It's coming out with, or came out with Mason Press, and it's our pleasure to have the four editors with us, Laliv, Melamed, Philipp, Dominik, Keidl, Vinzenz, Hediger, and Antonio Somaini. The volume is a project initiated by the Graduate Research Training Program, the Graduiertenkolleg Configurations of Film, and appears in the series, which is also named Configurations of Film. It's funded by the Deutsche Forschungsgemeinschaft, and we at the Research Center Normative Orders have the pleasure to work together with the Graduiertenkolleg and with Vinzenz especially. The graduate program is hosted by the Institute of Theater, Film and Media Studies at Goethe University, Frankfurt, in cooperation with the Institute of Media Studies at Philipp's Université in Marburg, the Institute of Film, Theater, Media and Culture Studies at Gutenberg Universität Mainz, and the Hochschule für Gestaltung in Offenbach am Main. If I may, I briefly introduce our four speakers, and I start with our guest from Paris, Professor Antonio Somaini is Professor of Film, Media and Visual Culture Theory at the Université Sorbonne, Nouvelle in Paris, where he's also chair of the Department of Film and Media Studies. His research interests include the history of film and media theories, as well as issues in contemporary visual culture. He's a member of the steering committee of the European Network for Cinema and Media Studies, and member of the advisory board of the International Research Institute for Cultural Technologies and Media Philosophy of the Bauhaus University in Weimar. Dr. Laliv Melamed is postdoc researcher at the Graduiertenkolleg Configurations of Film, holds a PhD from the Department of Cinema Studies at New York University. Her dissertation was entitled Sovereign Intimacy, Israeli Homemade Video Memorials and the Politics of Loss, and it was awarded a prize by the Society for Cinema and Media Studies. Dr. Melamed has published extensively in English and Hebrew, especially on topics of nonfiction, media and art, the Israel-Palestine conflict, and the militarization of everyday media practices. Dr. Philipp Dominik Keidl is also postdoctoral fellow at the Graduiertenkolleg, holds a PhD in film and moving image studies from Concordia University in Montreal. His research concentrates on media and material culture and moving image preservation and exhibition. He has published his research extensively in several journals and edited collections, including the Moving Image, Film Criticism, and the Routledge Companion to Media and Tourism, forthcoming. Last not least, my dear colleague Vinzenz Hediger, who is Professor of Cinema Studies at the Goethe University and Director of the Graduiertenkolleg Configurations of Film, co-founder of the European Network for Cinema and Media Studies, founding editor of the Zeitschrift für Medienwissenschaftler, and the crowning achievement, an important and long-standing member of our Normative Orders Research Network, where we have the great pleasure to work with him, having worked on a number of projects in the past, such as his research on configuring the demos, cinema, the global digital economy, and the crisis of democracy. And he also curated the lecture series, Lecture and Film, in cooperation with the Film Institute and the Film Museum here in Frankfurt. And we also collaborate on a number of research projects to come, hopefully. And it's a great pleasure to have him in our center. He is an expert in the history of film theory, marginal film forms, global film industries, and if I may say so, in the critical political theory of cinema. And with this, I thank you again for joining us today, and I turn over to you, Vinzenz.
You're muted, Vinzenz.
Excuse me. Thank you, Rainer, for this generous and comprehensive introduction. We decided to choose a format of presentation where all the editors say something in descending order of the importance of their contribution to the success of the book, which means that Philipp and Laliv go first, followed by Antonio, and I will come in last. So Philipp and Laliv will introduce the project in more general terms. Antonio will say something about the cover image and his own contribution, and then I will add a little footnote on my piece in the book. Laliv and Philipp, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Rainer, for inviting us. It's really great to be here and introduce the book to the Normative Orders research community. I would also extend your welcome to Karin Fleck and Karim Doguel, who I think are here, who both contributed wonderful essays to the edited collection, as well as Andreas Kirchner, who is responsible for the book series Configurations of Film at Maison Presse, and of course Fabian Wessels, who was our editorial assistant and really played the most crucial role in bringing this edited collection to life and print. So you already introduced the research collective, so I'm starting a little bit with the overall goals of Configurations of Film, which is dedicated to the study of moving image cultures beyond the classical dispositif of cinema that has been the foundation of film studies for the longest time. And the projects in our group are all dedicated to the question of how film now functions in different formats, different locations and different uses in the production of cultural meaning, social action and political conflict. Now that the object that we understand to be film, its circulation and its production and consumption has changed so drastically with new digital technologies. And in this regard, the research group is also interested in the development of new interdisciplinary approaches to film studies and new theories and methods to understand these phenomena and study them. And of course, when the pandemic started, we noticed and realized the omnipresence of moving image media in different sites, and how the visuals were circulating and shown and used in different contexts. And this ranged from science to news, governments and entertainment industries, the cultural sector and retail, as well as a variety of subcultures and online communities, showing the moving image on the move between the public and the private, commercial and amateur cultures, as well as entertainment and information. So in short, we realized that media really played a crucial role in making the virus, the invisible virus and the intangible threat that it was, at least at the beginning for many, at the beginning how media helped making it visible and tangible. And at the same time, we were also wondering, or we felt the impact of the pandemic on our own everyday lives and practices as scholars. With libraries closed and conferences cancelled, venues shut down, classes moved online, and colleagues working from home, we were wondering how the pandemic would impact our work as scholars as well as pedagogues. Hence, we really early on in the pandemic, in April, we decided to put together this edited collection and inviting members of our research group to reflect on these phenomena, both in terms of the media objects that were circulating in the pandemic, as well as media scholarship in general and its conditions under pandemic conditions. So we asked them to write short essays that we would publish with our partner Maison Presse in the Colleagues book series. And the aim was to provide a quick but nevertheless rigorous analysis of media during the pandemic, and especially these early moments to capture this very special moment. And even though we were aware that not all of these phenomena were new, but in some cases more amplified or highlighted or reappeared, for example, as Karen really nicely lays out in her essay on the drive-in, we thought it was really important to reflect on this moment in which so many different configurations came together and shaped the crisis. So in total, 37 authors accepted our invitations. This includes doctoral students from Configurations of Film, principal investigators from Configurations of Film, as well as the group's associates and Mercator fellows from the past, as well as those who will join us in the futures, as well as colleagues from our extended network. They have contributed essays from a wide range of research areas and methods, including media industry studies, fan studies, post-colonial studies, platform studies, indigenous studies, science and technology studies, and media management studies, just to name a few. And together, these essays really represent a nice reflection, not only how media has represented the pandemic, but how it also actively has shaped and produced a moment and a notion of crisis. And now Laliv is going to expand on these ideas a little bit further.
Okay, so following on the way Philipp set up the way we approach this volume, there were many paths that we could think about that would help us to understand how media is instrumental for the pandemic. For instance, to think about how media was important in former pandemic and to create this kind of like longue durée of mediation and pandemics, or to think about a conversation that became pretty pertinent in media studies with the introduction of digital culture and digital media, to think about virality and the different, until then, maybe metaphors that we used in order to think about contagion and media. The path that we chose to think about pandemic media as a term, a more kind of like general approach to think about the way this current global crisis shifted the way we think and use media, was to think about a sort of genealogy that we trace back to the notion of the media event, which is very much has to do with the way we approach historical shift or the notion of crisis. So there is a sort of tectonic shift that we need to map and think about. Media event is very much a term that comes from television and from live broadcasting, and basically address the notion of how media produces the historical event through its different operations, mainly predicated on the notion of live broadcasting that allows sort of synchronization of time and space, keep the spectators, or maybe even say, integrate the spectators into the event and provide them with constant flow of information. And maybe most importantly, create a sense of historicity. So something is happening and we all need to be attuned to constantly, hit the refresh button in order to be in the loop or be part of something bigger. And this is, of course, is further accentuated with globalization and a global flow of information, but also with the media that we have available to use it today. And we were interested how the notion of the media event that emerged within television studies, but as I showed, still relevant, even more so today with digital media and digital cultures. We were interested how it kind of like reflects on the notion of a global crisis that the pandemic is. And part of our understanding of these kind of like correlations between media and crisis was that media is not only a form to reflect the crisis or channel the necessary acts of governance from informing the citizens to surveil them or or even infrastructure used by, let's call them the techniques of the pandemic itself, from virologists to policymakers that use media to counter their decisions. So media is not only a means for these various operations, but it also what in itself produced the notion of crisis and shapes it, or shape, because we think of media in plural. So the notion of crisis became very important for the way we set up the book. We posted here what is a longer citation from the introduction, where we address this idea of crisis. Another important perspective that we think about in our introduction is also the way the pandemic affected scholarship in general. So if the notion of crisis and the media event is kind of like a way to suggest, our way to suggest an intervention into the field of media studies that comes with the pandemic, or maybe there is further accentuated with the pandemic, we also had many thoughts about the way such a massive global crisis affects the way we think about our own work and about the production of scholarship. So as all of you know, there was a lot of pressure or a sort of sense of urgency to produce or to write about the pandemic as it happened, but also these have after effects, or has a sort of excessive result, right? I mean, how can we estimate the long-term effects of a phenomena while it's still unfolding? Since the book came out, in quite a few events when we were invited to present the book, we were asked, how would, pandemic media, the sequel, or Pandemic Media 2 would look like today when we're almost a year into the pandemic. So we were thinking a lot about, what is at stake when you try to estimate a certain phenomena while there's all these notion of urgency or global happening that still shapes it. What is at stake when you try to capture something that is still formulating? So this is why we kind of started thinking about pandemic media, and to take us back to the actual production process of the book. It was very clear to us from very early on that while we ask people or we commit them to a very, very quick process of production, we also want to insist on, for instance, the review process, which we found very important for scholarly writing. And another thing that we were thinking was the notion of pandemic scholarship, that this is maybe not produce, let's say, a more nuanced and detailed form of contemplation that we would normally expect from long-term studies, but actually producing a record of something while it's happening. We write in the introduction that while we were working on the collection itself, in between the spring of 2020 to the late fall, we already saw that some of the phenomena we were working on, or other authors were writing about, already shifted. Videos disappeared from YouTube, things took a different turn than expected. So in a way, we also started thinking about pandemic media as producing these records of the very present of the pandemic as it kind of comes into being as a global phenomenon. And with this note, I'll pass it to Antonio to also kind of explain a little bit about the cover that we picked for the book, and also a little bit reflect about your contribution. Thank you.
Thank you, Laliv. I will now share my screen briefly. Can you see the image of my PowerPoint? Yes. So Thank you for the invitation, Rainer. It's great to present it in this context. First, the very concept of pandemic media is a concept that we intended as an attempt to analyze media in pandemic times and media under pandemic conditions. Of course, we did not consider the COVID-19 pandemic as only a media phenomenon, but we were well aware that the media transformations that were happening were absolutely worthy being analyzed and understood. Most of us, what we did was to try to work on some perhaps media phenomena that we were already concentrating on before the beginning of the pandemic, trying to understand how these media phenomena eventually changed or morphed in this period. In my case, what I did was to work on the phenomenon of machine vision, on machine vision technologies, trying to understand their social and political implications and their different uses during the COVID-19 pandemic, at least up to what I could see up to August, because my text was written during the summer. And as we know, this pandemic is continuing and things keep on changing. My essay is an essay that's written within the wider context of a new research project I just began, entitled Machine Vision, What is an Image in the Age of Machine Learning? A few words about this research project. I try to analyze the aesthetic, epistemological, political, and media archaeological implications of three strictly interrelated phenomena. On the one hand, the new technologies of machine vision based on processes of machine learning. On the other, the presence on the internet of trillions of images that are machine readable in the sense that they can be seen, so to say, and analyzed by such systems of machine vision. And third, the new images generated by processes of machine learning, be it portraits of people who do not exist, be it the deep fakes, these videos that are having a very important political impact also in recent times, or enhanced, so to say, historical documents, for example, archival footage that is enhanced to higher degrees of resolution, maybe colorized, transformed in different ways, and so on. I try to understand the implications of all of this. I try to understand this as what I consider it to be as a major tectonic shift in the history of images and visual media, a shift that even invites us to ask what we still mean by vision and image in relation to such technologies and whether these terms are still pertinent or are purely metaphorical. It's also a shift that is transforming the contemporary iconosphere into a vast field for data mining and aggregation, a field in which faces, bodies, gestures, expressions, emotions, objects, places, and even temperatures may be identified, labeled, stored, organized, retrieved, and processed as data that can be quickly accessed and activated for a wide variety of goals. So it is having all this in mind that I decided to tackle the question of machine vision in pandemic times, trying to understand the role that these technologies played in the context of a COVID pandemic that seemed to trigger a double, apparently contrasting dynamic. On the one hand, physical distancing, and on the other, data aggregation, producing a situation in which, as bodies were instructed to stay apart and even self-isolate in the famous quarantines, data about bodies began to be collected and aggregated in order to monitor and contain the spread of the virus. So I studied various applications of machine vision technologies in this period, such as the diagnostic examination of medical imaging, for example, the scanning of patients' lungs in great quantities, or the enforcing of physical distancing and the wearing of masks through drones and robots equipped with machine vision technologies, the scanning of barcodes associated to quarantines, or even the use of thermal imaging in order to identify unusual body temperatures. Here we see just some images of diagnostic examination that could be done in great quantity and accelerated speed through machine vision technologies, the use of drones, that we have seen all over the world, in this case, the Promenade des Anglais in Nice. The infamous dog robot that was seen in the streets and the parks of Singapore, equipped with machine vision technologies and enforcing social distancing. The question of barcodes used especially in China with the green or red colors in order to enforce quarantines and collect data about citizens that could then be used also for other purposes, raising, of course, the whole question of surveillance of data and privacy protection and so on. The use of robots equipped with thermal imaging in order to identify unusual temperatures. So the use of thermal imaging as a form of diagnostic at a distance. And this leads me to conclude to the images that we chose for the cover, which come from a project by a Magnum photographer based in Paris, Antoine D'Agata, who at the beginning of the national lockdown in France on March 11th, decided to basically settle in the studios of Magnum and spend the days and the nights going across the half-deserted streets of Paris and into the hospitals in the COVID departments, equipped with a thermal camera that allowed him to capture infrared rays that would basically visualize the different temperatures and basically see the lockdown and the COVID pandemic context under the perspective of thermal imaging. He produced about 13,000 images, out of which he exhibited 1,000. And then a film was produced, a 7-minute film, which edits together some of these images. So it is from this collection of images that we decided to take the image that is used for the cover of the book and which is then declined in different ways for the different essays. So I will stop here and I will also put the link to the video, which lasts 7 minutes, in the chat. So if someone wants to see it, they can simply click on it. Thank you.
Thank you, Antonio, and to conclude this short series of short presentations, I want to add a few remarks concerning my own contribution to the volume. Part of what I'm trying to show by discussing some aspects of my contribution is that normative orders is actually exactly the right place for us to be presenting this book. Normative orders, of course, is the unique aspect of normative orders is that it is one of the few research institutions worldwide that brings together the social sciences, law, economics, the humanities, philosophy, and political science to discuss current issues of political theory and critical political theory in particular. So it's a unique interdisciplinary environment, and I'm always excited by the fact that there's also a place for media studies here. As I was working on my own contribution, which deals with Donald Trump, I was sometimes asking myself precisely about the relationship between media studies and political science and political theory. And then in the wake of the storming of the Capitol, an American colleague, Jason Reed, the professor at the professor of philosophy at the University of Southern Maine, posted this particular tweet in which he argued that if Karl Marx argued that political theory is best viewed through the critique of political economy, Donald Trump demonstrates that it is best seen through media theory. And that's, you know, it's one of those instances where somebody says something and you instantly think, yeah, exactly, that's what I've been saying for a long time. And I just didn't manage to formulate it so succinctly. So I think there's a point to that, and I can certainly try and corroborate that claim by pointing you to the work that I've been doing for this volume. I have to switch screens. So when we first started working on this collection, and I was thinking what my contribution would be about, this is the image that first gained my interest and actually provided the trigger for the piece that I contributed to Pandemic Media. What you see here is a photograph of an event that took place at the White House in the Rose Garden on March 30th, 2020, at a point when you would expect the President of the United States to focus on pandemic prevention and on fighting the pandemic and on organizing the reaction on a national scale. He started doing these very weird press briefings, which have become infamous, of course, in the course of which he proposed things like injecting bleach to fight the pandemic. But early on in the series of those press briefings, one of the things he did was invite this gentleman to discuss the pandemic, and actually primarily to have him say how great Donald Trump's reaction to the pandemic had been so far and how much greater it would be going forward. Now, this gentleman is somebody who has absolutely nothing to do with epidemiology or virology or medicine or whatever. He is an entrepreneur who became famous for producing customized pillows and selling them on television. His name is Mike Lindell, and he is generally known in the US as the My Pillow guy, someone who American television audiences will be familiar with from his infomercial television advertisements, in which he would give you a tour of his factory in Minnesota and then try to get you to buy one of his customized pillow to improve your sleep. He is also a reformed crack addict and a great fan of Donald Trump. And the main reason apparently why Trump brought him in was that he was one of the few people at that point who were willing to sing his praises without any qualifications. And that's what he did. But what caught my attention is the fact that this is someone who shares a distinctive trait with Donald Trump, the president, namely the fact that he is mostly known through television and that he is primarily a television personality and a television salesman. The standard qualification of Donald Trump with regard to his origins as a media figure is to call him a reality TV show host. But what's striking here is that he taps into a different form of television, a form of television that enjoys as little cultural standing as reality TV, but has at least as broad a following as reality TV shows, namely home shopping television. So this particular image and this particular event prompted me to look into Trump's connection to home shopping a little bit more. And one of the things that I quickly found out is that the Trump family and the Trump clan has very close ties to home shopping and television shopping. I mean, one of the striking things he did during the campaign is that at a press conference after having won the primaries in Michigan and Mississippi, he went out on stage and actually basically gave an infomercial praising Trump branded products like Trump steaks, Trump wine, Trump water, many of which, by the way, were no longer in production or on sale. But he basically, in the hour of his greatest political triumph, he took the stage and addressed the audience as a television salesman, a home shopping salesman for luxury consumer products that basically are not essential elements of consumption, but luxury products. So I started doing a little research and realized very quickly that most of the members of his family, the most famous members of his family, are actually also home shopping celebrities, particularly Ivanka Trump, who used QVC, the most important home shopping network, to sell shoes. and his wife, Melania, who apparently made a lot of money selling relatively cheap jewelry with her name as the brand, also via home shopping. So that in turn got me interested in the home shopping network, QVC, which is the dominant home shopping network worldwide, and which is interesting because it's a cable home shopping network that is broadcast only in the 7 richest nations in the world. So the home shopping market is basically G7 plus China. They now also have a channel in China. Canada no longer carries QVC on its cable services, but you can buy, you can basically home shop on QVC all across Europe and in the United States, in Japan, and in China. QVC's programming is heavily gendered. It's addressed to, particularly in the US, mostly fairly well-to-do suburban white middle-class women. And it is addressed to people who, you know, don't share the problem of economic anxiety that has so often been described as one of the key motivators of Trump voters. So these are well-to-do people who have a lot of time on their hand and can spend that time watching home shopping television and engaging in impulse buys. What's particular about QVC is not only that this is a major media corporation. The turnover of QVC, the annual turnover of QVC is bigger than most Hollywood studios. Paramount, for instance, had a turnover of about $8 billion in 2019. QVC in the same year had a turnover of $11 billion. So this is a major global media corporation with a very specific targeted reach into fairly well, particularly in the US, it reaches fairly well-to-do white suburban middle class women mostly, and actually, you know, if you look at the voter statistics, that is exactly the backbone of Trump's political support. So from there, I dug a little deeper and looked at the presentational modes of QVC. And what's interesting there is that QVC practices a form of parasocial interaction. So the hosts, which are mostly celebrities, you know, comedians, actors, models who try to sell luxury products associated with their name to a television audience. The hosts actually interact indirectly and directly with the audience. There's a call-in segment where people can call in and tell the host how much they like their product and how happy they are to have bought it. They also always talk about how, you know, how it adversely affects their bank account, but they never seem to be too worried because really these people do have enough money to engage in impulse buying. And so if you look at that presentational mode, and if you look at what QVC really does, you realize that QVC's presentational modes and the brand of QVC is very much in tune with Trump. Trump, the luxury celebrity, is someone who promises you status elevation through consumption. And he's also someone who, through his now defunct Twitter account, but also through his mode of address in his rally speeches, addresses his voters as, you know, members of a congregation that over which he presides, but of which he is also part. So what this led me to see and try and analyze was a very interesting conflagration of the presentational modes and the values that are communicated through home shopping television and the political style and the governance style, actually, of Donald Trump, the president. With regard to the pandemic, one of my claims in the essay is also that you can understand why Trump was structurally unable to address the pandemic and the challenge of the pandemic, and maybe also help you understand why he did things like suggesting that people inject bleach to fight the pandemic. Because the essence of Trump, the home shopping television personality or home shopping television president, is again status elevation through consumption, and in that worldview, the only way to care for you or for anyone else is to care for you, or the only way to care is to care for yourself through consumption. So the only way you can do something about the pandemic is to find something that you can ingest to fight it, and you know, in the early stages. For Trump, it was bleach. Then later, when he himself got COVID, he of course received a high-powered cocktail of medicine that basically saved his life. But the treatment apparently cost about $1 million to administer, so it was not something that you could really sell on television. Yet still, after he returned to the White House, after he was released from Walter Reed Hospital after the COVID treatment, he gave another television address in which he spoke about the treatment exactly again like a home shopping host. And he said, you know, I've had this wonderful treatment and I want everyone to have this, and you should try it. It's just fantastic.
Let's not forget about hydroxychloroquine also,
yeah,
because
of course,
he touted that for months. Yes.
Yes, we all know. By the way, the state of Kansas bought hydroxychloroquine reserve, now valued at $2 million, and they're now trying to get rid of it because they realize that it's not working. But they were like basically hypnotized. You know, public health officials in the state of Kansas were hypnotized by the television salesman Trump to buy into that. So the point I'm making is, I would agree indeed that we sadly perhaps live in a world where political theory needs to be seen through the lens of media studies, and not only that, in order to be able to continue to contribute to the development of political theory, we're probably going to be forced to spend a lot of time watching home shopping television. Thank you.